You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I think it's safe to say that Syracuse is off to an outstanding start to this upcoming recruiting cycle. First of all, the Orange have 16 total verbal commitments so far in the class of 2026. That is second in the country. And in 2025, for context, Syracuse football led the country with 35 commits, according to 24/7 Sports. So once again, it seems like Syracuse is going to have one of the highest quantity of recruiting classes in the country. Now, regarding the quality of the 2026 recruiting class, well, it's shaping up to be really, really strong for the Orange. On 24/7 Sports, they have the 9th best recruiting class in the country. They are also 9th in the composite rankings. The composite rankings are important because they factor in the other recruiting services like ESPN, On3, and Rivals. So the fact that they're 9th on 24/7 Sports and 9th in the composite rankings is a big deal for Syracuse football. And on 24/7 Sports, they have the second best class in the ACC. I would say that's pretty good. What do you think? Comment in the comment section below, right? On On3, Syracuse has the 25th rated recruiting class in the country, so still lower than 24/7 Sports, but top 25 in the country. I mean, that's pretty damn good for Syracuse football, and it is 6th best in the ACC. Now, will these rankings hold up? Will Syracuse end up with a top 10 recruiting class over on 24/7 Sports or a top 25 class over on On3? As far as top 10 is concerned, chances are that will not necessarily hold up. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a Syracuse fan. I'm a Syracuse alum. I want the team to win and get all the best players. However, I don't think it's necessarily realistic right now for Syracuse to have a top 10 recruiting class in the country when everything is all said and done, right? I don't think that's necessarily realistic. However, what I will say is I have a lot of optimism that this will be the best or at least the highest rated recruiting class in the Fran Brown era. For context, Syracuse's 2024 recruiting class was slightly better than Syracuse's 2025 recruiting class, at least according to the rankings, which, again, you can kind of take with a grain of salt, but we're going to use the recruiting rankings in this case to determine which class was better. Obviously, we'll see how it all plays out on the field as far as who becomes good and who doesn't in the recruiting class. But in 2024, it was higher than 2025. It was 37th on 24/7 Sports and on On3 in the country. The reason the 2026 recruiting class will likely exceed 2024 is because of the quality of players that are already in the 2026 class. I posted this on Twitter at LO_Syracuse that Syracuse right now has 4 players in the class that are rated 4 stars on at least 2 major recruiting services. Think about that talent for a second. The Orange football, mind you, they have 4 players in the class so far that are rated 4 stars on multiple recruiting services. Amare Gough is a 4-star on 24/7 Sports and on On3. Jarius Rogers, a 4-star on 24/7 Sports and on ESPN. Javion Cooper is a 4-star on On3, ESPN, and Rivals. So he, out of all the recruits, is the closest to being a consensus 4-star recruit. You got Cameron Wilson, a 4-star on ESPN and on Rivals. And not only are these players 4-star recruits, they are all rated as a top 300 player in the country on at least one major recruiting service. You're getting, or at least Syracuse in this case, is getting some of the best players at their respective positions in the entire nation. Amare Gough is rated as high as the 34th best wide receiver in the country on 24/7 Sports. Jarius Rogers is rated as the 23rd best edge rusher in the country on 24/7 Sports. Javion Cooper is the 18th best tackle in the country on ESPN. And Cameron Wilson, to round it up, is the 30th best edge rusher in the country on Rivals. All of this is to say that Syracuse football recruiting remains really strong, at least relatively speaking, pre-Fran Brown era and now in the Fran Brown era. It's very healthy. They are getting top talent to commit to them. And before you sit here and say, well, these are just verbal commits, most of the time, when you get a verbal commitment, they stay. Now, it's not a guarantee because a verbal commitment, doesn't hold up necessarily. I mean, it's like a handshake agreement. There's nothing signed that says that you are going to go there. However, I once ran a study on this, so you can probably find it at LO_Syracuse if you search it up. I believe Syracuse, in the last 5 years, it's about 90% according to 24/7 Sports as far as the actual players that they get versus the amount of decommits that they get. So when you get a verbal commit, that is a very big deal. And at the end of the day, you'd rather have the verbal commit than not have the verbal commit. And overall, I think that Syracuse football is in a very healthy state so far as recruiting. And if the Orange have a good to really good season next year with that schedule, combined with their recruiting rankings over the last few years in the Fran Brown era, I got news for all of you. Syracuse football is going to have to pay up to Fran Brown. They're going to have to pay up. You look at the schedule coming up for Syracuse. You got Tennessee neutral site, at Notre Dame, at Clemson, at SMU, at Miami, at Georgia Tech. It's one of the toughest schedules in the country next year. They have a good year. They're going to have to really pay up to keep head coach Fran Brown because the recruiting that he has done with Syracuse compared to the last 10 to 15 years, I honestly never thought I would see it. Where Syracuse has 4 players rated in the top 300 overall.